They thought I was just a trembling widow who would stay home on Christmas Eve while they toasted with champagne in my son's living room. But through the crack in the basement window, I saw him chained to the cold concrete floor of the house he paid for. They made a fatal mistake, assuming I was weak. I gripped the handle of my knife. Tonight, their party ends, and my war begins. My name is Margaret Doyle. I am 61 years old, a widow, and for 30 years I scraped people off the pavement as an EMT in Chicago. Now I live in a drafty wooden cabin on the edge of a snow-choked town in Wyoming, where the silence is usually my only companion. I was folding a red wool sweater I had spent the last 2 months knitting. The yarn was a little rough, but the colour was vibrant, meant to bring some warmth to my daughter-in-law. Sabrina. The cabin smelled of buttered popcorn and pine needles, a festive scent that felt like a lie when I looked at my dining table. It was set for one, just a single ceramic bowl and a spoon reflecting the firelight. I placed the sweater into my suitcase, smoothing out the wrinkles. I was not staying here. Not this year. My mind drifted to Lucas, my only son. He was 34 now, the owner of North Star Freight, a trucking company based in Silver Ridge, Colorado. I closed my eyes and saw his face from our last visit 3 months ago. He had looked tired, but his smile was genuine, his hands gripping my shoulders with a strength that reassured me. "Mom, you have to come this Christmas," he had insisted, his eyes bright. "I will make a proper dinner, the first real dinner in my own house. Please." My phone buzzed against the wooden table, the vibration sounding violent in the quiet room. I picked it up, expecting a confirmation of my arrival time. It was a text from Lucas. "Old lady, don't come here. I don't need you. Stay home." I stared at the screen. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Old lady. Lucas never called me that. He called me Ma. Sometimes Mum. Never old lady. I put on my reading glasses, my old paramedic instincts kicking in, analysing the screen like it was a patient's chart. The punctuation was perfect. Periods in the right places, capital letters. I scrolled up to his previous messages. They were a mess of typos, missing commas, and silly thumbs-up emojis. This new message was sterile. It was clinical. It was clean in a way that felt dirty. I dialed his number immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I did not leave a message. Instead, I called Sabrina. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Margaret. Her voice was thin, trembling like a violin string about to snap. "Sabrina, I got a strange text from Lucas," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Is everything all right? Oh, Margaret. We..." She paused, and I heard a sharp intake of breath. "We are at the airport. We decided to go to my parents' beach house for the holiday. Last minute. Sorry." I pressed the phone harder against my ear, closing my eyes to shut out the visual distractions. I listened. If they were at the airport, I should hear the drone of announcements, the rumble of suitcase wheels, the distinct hum of a crowded terminal. I heard none of that. Instead, I heard a heavy, thumping bass line. I heard raucous laughter. I heard the distinct clink of high-quality crystal toasting. It was the kind of aggressive party music Lucas had always hated. He once told me he would never allow that trash in his home. Then, a voice cut through the background noise. It was not Lucas. It was a deep, arrogant baritone, close to the phone, as if the speaker was leaning over Sabrina's shoulder. "Hang up. Tell that old woman to stay home." The line went dead, I stood there in the center of my living room, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a rhythm I had not felt since my days in the ambulance. It was the siren call of adrenaline. A memory flashed before me, unbidden and sharp. A snowy night in Chicago, 20 years ago. A young girl had called dispatch, whispered for help, and then hung up. I had hesitated for just a moment, double-checking the address, and we arrived 10 minutes late. 10 minutes was the difference between life and death that night. I washed the blood off my hands, but I never washed away the guilt. I looked at the text message one last time. Old lady. They thought I was frail. They thought I would cry and go back to my knitting. They did not know that the woman who raised Lucas Doyle had spent half her life fighting death in the back of a speeding van. I grabbed my coat. I was not going to be 10 minutes late this time. I made my decision in less than 5 minutes. I did not pack for a holiday. I packed for a shift. Into my battered suitcase went 3 pairs of thick socks, 2 flannel shirts, and the heavy wool coat I used to wear during winter storms in Chicago. Then came the real essentials. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out my old EMT bag. It was faded and smelled of rubbing alcohol and old leather, but the supplies inside were still good. I tucked it next to a bottle of whiskey I had distilled myself, intended as a celebration gift for Lucas, now likely to serve a different purpose. Finally, I slipped my folding rescue knife into my coat pocket. The steel felt cold and reassuring against my thumb. I locked the front door of my cabin, leaving the warmth behind for the biting wind of the Wyoming night. I chose the night bus to Silver Ridge. My eyes were not what they used to be, and navigating icy mountain passes in the dark was a risk I could not afford to take. The bus station was a depressing slab of concrete illuminated by flickering neon signs that buzzed like dying insects. A few weary souls stood in line, their breath misting in the freezing air, clutching cheap presents and avoiding eye contact. It was the silent, lonely side of Christmas that the songs never mentioned. I took a seat at the very back of the bus, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. As the engine roared to life and we pulled onto the highway, the snow-covered plains blurred into a white abyss. My reflection in the window ghosted over the landscape. But in my mind, I saw a different face. I saw Lucas at 5 years old, his face smeared with cookie dough in our cramped Chicago rental. He was running in circles, shouting, "One day I will buy you a house as big as a castle." Mom. No more leaking pipes. He had kept that promise. But at what cost? I replayed the last 6 months in my head, looking for the cracks I had ignored. The phone calls had become shorter. "I am busy. Mom. Not a good time. Mom." And whenever I mentioned the Knox family, Sabrina's parents, who owned half the restaurants and truck stops in Silver Ridge, Lucas would go quiet. There was a shadow in his voice, a hesitation that I had mistaken for fatigue. Now I knew it was fear. Across the aisle, a young college student was holding her phone up, talking animatedly to a screen. "Merry Christmas Eve. Guys, we are literally in the middle of nowhere right now." She was live streaming. I watched her for a moment, fascinated by how easily she broadcast her reality to the world. A camera could be a weapon. I realized, if you film something, it becomes real. It becomes undeniable. The thought flickered in my mind like a match in the wind, then faded, stored away for later. The bus rumbled down the interstate, slicing through the darkness. We passed giant billboards illuminated by floodlights. One screamed, "Jesus loves you," in bold red letters. The very next one promised fast cash, no credit check. That was America in a nutshell: salvation on one side, predation on the other. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, caught my gaze in the rearview mirror when we stopped for a brief break. "Visiting family?" he asked, his voice rough from smoke. "I am going to see my son." I replied. I offered nothing else. I could not tell him that I had a terrible knot in my stomach that felt like swallowed glass. The night stretched on, endless and dark. I drifted into a fitful sleep. I dreamt of the day Lucas was 10. A heavy oak bookshelf had toppled over in the library, pinning him underneath. I remembered the scream. I remembered running. In the dream, just like in reality. I did not think. I did not wait for help. I lifted that heavy shelf with my bare hands, my muscles screaming, fueled by a mother's panic. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding. The memory settled into a cold resolve. It did not matter if he was 10 or 34. It did not matter that I was 61 and my joints ached when it rained. I was still the only one who could lift the weight off him. Through the windshield, I saw the glow of Silver Ridge appearing on the horizon. It sat nestled between the mountains, glittering with thousands of Christmas lights and the towering signs of shopping malls. It looked beautiful. It looked like a trap. As the bus began to brake, the hissing of the air pressure matched the thumping in my ears. It was not the rhythm of an old woman trembling in the cold. It was the steady, focused beat of a first responder arriving at a scene. I checked my pocket for the knife one last time. I was ready. I stepped off the bus and hailed a taxi to the outskirts of Silver Ridge. The driver, a chatty man with a thick mustache, whistled as we drove past manicured lawns and driveways lined with imported stone. "Look at that," he said, pointing to a mansion draped in shimmering blue lights. "Folks here spend more on electricity in December than I make in a year. Nice bag, by the way." He was being sarcastic. My bag was canvas, stained from years of use, and it sat on the floorboard like a dirty secret. I ignored him and gripped the handle tighter. When the taxi turned onto Lucas's street, I knew immediately that something was wrong. Every house on the block was a beacon of festive cheer, with inflatable reindeer and synchronized light shows. Every house except one. Lucas's home was a black void in a sea of neon. There were no lights on the eaves, no wreath on the door. It looked abandoned, except for the driveway. 3 massive black SUVs with out-of-state plates were jammed into the driveway, their rear tires crushing the edge of the lawn. My blood simmered. Lucas was obsessive about that grass. He treated it like a golf course green. He would never let anyone park a heavy truck on it. I paid the driver and waited for him to drive away before I approached. I did not go to the front door immediately. Instead, I crept through the shadows of the side yard, my boots sinking into the snow, and peered through the living room window. The curtains were drawn, but left a gap wide enough for me to see everything. The room was blazing with light. Gerald Knox, Sabrina's father, was sprawled on Lucas's new leather sofa, his legs spread wide. He was red-faced, holding a crystal tumbler of Lucas's 20-year-old scotch. Beside him, his wife Marlene was laughing, her head thrown back. She flicked the ash from her cigarette directly onto the Persian rug. I felt a spike of rage. Lucas had saved for 6 months to buy that rug. He told me it was the first thing he owned that made him feel like a success. Then I saw Trent Knox, Sabrina's brother. He was sitting on the coffee table, literally sitting on the glass surface, wearing muddy work boots. His arms were covered in tattoos, and a thick gold chain caught the light around his neck. He was holding one of my son's kitchen knives, using the blade to pry the cap off a beer bottle. He laughed when the glass neck chipped, spitting a piece of glass onto the floor. I scanned the room for Lucas. He was nowhere. Then Sabrina walked in from the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks. She was wearing a silk dress and full makeup, but I saw what a casual observer might miss. Her left cheek was slightly swollen, covered by a heavy layer of foundation. And when she set the tray down, her sleeve rode up just enough to reveal a faint, yellowish-purple bruise on her wrist. It was the shape of a thumb. I had seen enough. I marched to the front door and pressed the doorbell hard. Inside. The music cut off instantly. I heard frantic whispers through the wood. "Who is that?" A voice hissed. "I told you no guests." It was Trent's voice, deep and angry. The door opened a crack. Sabrina stood there, her eyes wide with terror. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Margaret," she whispered. "What? What are you doing here? I came to see my son," I said, my voice flat and hard. "Where is he?" "He is sick," Sabrina stammered, blocking the view with her body. "He has a terrible flu. Really bad. He is sleeping upstairs. You cannot come in. We don't want you to get sick." Before I could answer, the door was yanked open wider. Trent filled the doorway, towering over me. The smell of expensive liquor and cheap cologne washed over me. "Go home, old lady," he sneered. "We got the text. He doesn't want you here. This is a family party, and we don't need any charity cases." "I am his mother," I said, stepping forward instead of back. "I am not leaving until I see him, just for 1 minute." Sabrina made a small, whimpering sound. "Please, Margaret, just go." Trent reached out and grabbed Sabrina's wrist, the same one with the bruise. He squeezed it. I saw her face go pale, her eyes watering in sudden pain, but she did not pull away. She said, "Leave." Trent said, his eyes cold and dead, "Lucas is sleeping. Don't make me call the cops on a trespassing senior citizen. It would be embarrassing for you." He slammed the door in my face. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the frozen air. I stood alone on the porch, the wind cutting through my coat. A second later, the bass of the music started up again, and I heard Gerald Knox laughing inside. They thought the door was a wall. They did not know it was just the starting line. I turned my back on the front door and walked down the driveway, hunching my shoulders like a defeated old woman who knew her place. I let my boots drag in the snow until I reached the corner of the street. Then, the act dropped. I ducked low and cut across the neighbor's frozen lawn, moving fast through the shadows of the pine trees. The thumping bass from Lucas's living room was so loud it vibrated in my chest, masking the crunch of my footsteps as I circled to the back of the house. The backyard was dark, a stark contrast to the festive light show out front. I scanned the foundation of the house until I found the small rectangular window that looked into the basement. It was completely covered in layers of thick black duct tape. I knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold soaking through my jeans, and pressed my ear against the glass. At first, I heard nothing but the muffled thumping of the music above and the hum of the furnace. Then, I heard it. A slow, heavy scrape of iron against concrete. Clink. It was the sound of a chain. I pulled my folding rescue knife from my pocket, with a steady hand. I sliced the corner of the tape and peeled it back just enough to create a peephole the size of a coin. I squinted into the gloom. It was pitch black down there, save for a sliver of weak yellow light cutting across the floor. In that slice of light, I saw a foot. It was bare, blue with cold, and the ankle was swollen to the size of a grapefruit, mottled with purple bruises. I scrambled back from the window, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I ran to the sliding glass back door. It was locked tight. I took a breath and forced myself to think. Lucas was a creature of habit. Since he was 16, he always hid a spare key in the third flower pot from the door. I counted the pots lined up against the siding 1, 2, 3. I plunged my hand into the frozen dirt of the third planter. My fingers brushed against cold metal. It was still there. No one had bothered to clean the pots, and no one had found his key. I slipped inside the kitchen. It smelled of stale beer and expensive perfume. But the room was empty. The party was contained in the living room. I moved silent as a ghost toward the narrow door that led to the basement. It was locked. I examined the hardware. The knob was old brass, but the deadbolt above it was shiny and new. However, the wood of the doorframe was original to the house, dry and splintering. I did not have time to pick a lock. I stepped back, angled my body, and threw my entire 61 years of weight into the door. I led with my shoulder, aiming right next to the lock. Crack. Pain shot down my arm, but the wood shattered. The door swung inward, banging against the wall. I stumbled onto the landing, regained my balance, and descended the wooden stairs. The air down there was frigid and smelled of mold, urine, and fear. A single naked bulb hung from a rafter, casting long, dancing shadows. Lucas, I whispered. He was there. My son was stripped from the waist down, shivering violently on the cold concrete floor. His right leg was twisted at a sickening angle, the skin black and blue. A heavy steel chain was padlocked around his good ankle. The other end bolted to a loop drilled directly into the foundation. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. His face was a mask of dried blood and fresh swelling. One eye was completely shut. He flinched when he saw me, squinting against the light. "Mom!" he rasped. His voice was broken glass. "Mom!" Oh, God. "You have to go." I rushed to his side, my knees hitting the hard floor. Beside him, on a small wooden crate, sat a collection of items that made my blood run cold. It was a medical kit, but not for healing. There was a rubber tourniquet, a box of fresh syringes, a small bag of white powder, and a metal spoon with the bottom scorched black. Next to the drugs lay a stack of shipping manifests with the North Star Freight logo stamped on them. "Lucas, look at me," I commanded, cupping his battered face. "What is this? What did they do?" He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and tears cut tracks through the blood on his cheeks. "The trucks," he wheezed, struggling to breathe. I found out. A week ago, Trent and Gerald, they are using my trucks, the spare tires, hollowed out, filled with white powder. He squeezed his eyes shut, a sob racking his chest. I told them I would go to the cops. He gasped out. "They beat me, chained me here. They are going to give me a Christmas dose. Mom, they want to make me an addict. So when the feds come, it looks like I am the kingpin, like I am the one, running the junk." I looked at the needle on the table. It was already loaded. They were not just going to kill him. They were going to murder his soul first. I grabbed my knife. The time for being a mother was over. It was time to be a surgeon, and I had a cancer to cut out. I snapped the blade of my rescue knife open and sliced through the zip ties binding Lucas's wrists. The plastic gave way with a sharp zip. He groaned, his body sagging forward against me. I caught him, ignoring the protest in my own arthritic back. I shifted into the mode I had lived in for 30 years. I was not a mother hugging her child. I was a paramedic stabilizing a patient. "Lucas, listen to me," I whispered, keeping my voice low and steady. "Do not move that right leg. It is a tib-fib fracture. If you move it, the bone might sever the artery. Breathe. Just breathe." I turned my attention to the heavy chain around his left ankle. The padlock was a shiny, hardened steel master lock. I cursed under my breath. My knife was useless against that. I looked around for a pry bar, anything heavy, but then the music upstairs cut out instantly. Silence. Then, heavy boots thudding on the floorboards above. "He is coming." Lucas whimpered, his eyes widening in panic. I scrambled up, reached for the pull chain of the single light bulb, and yanked it. The basement plunged into darkness. I shoved an old paint cabinet in front of Lucas to shield him from immediate view. Then I pressed my back against the cold concrete pillar near the stairs. My heart was not fluttering anymore. It was hammering a war drum against my ribs. I gripped the handle of my knife so tight my knuckles ached. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A beam of yellow light from the hallway cut through the dust motes, followed by the smell of cheap beer and overpowering cologne. Trent. He lumbered down the stairs, heavy and clumsy. He pulled out his phone and clicked on the flashlight, the beam swinging erratically around the room. In his other hand, he held the syringe I had seen on the tray, tapping it against his finger. "Hey, sleeping beauty." Trent slurred, his voice echoing in the damp space. "Time to try the family product. Brother-in-law. Don't be rude." He reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward where Lucas was lying. As he bent down to shove the cabinet aside, exposing his flank, I moved. I did not have the speed of a 20-year-old, but I had gravity. I launched myself from behind the pillar, driving my shoulder with all my weight into his kidney. He grunted, stumbling sideways. The syringe flew from his hand and skittered across the concrete. "You bitch!" he roared. He spun around with surprising speed for a drunk man. His backhand caught me square across the face. The impact was blinding. I saw white stars burst behind my eyelids, and I tasted copper as my lips split against my teeth. I staggered back, my head swimming. Trent lunged at me, his hands going for my throat. But in that split second of violence, my training took over. I was back in the ER, handling a combative meth addict. As his hands came up, I hooked my thumb deep into the soft tendon of his wrist and twisted hard. He howled, and his grip faltered, dropping a silver lighter he had been clutching. My free hand scrabbled across the medical tray on the table beside me. I was not looking for a weapon. I was looking for a countermeasure. My fingers closed around a plastic tube. An epinephrine auto-injector. Adrenaline. Trent recovered and grabbed my coat, lifting me off my heels. I used his momentum against him, dropping my weight and swinging my arm up. I jammed the needle into the side of his neck and slammed the plunger down. "Breathe deep," I hissed. A massive dose of adrenaline hit his system instantly. His eyes bulged. His heart must have kick-started into a chaotic, galloping rhythm. He gasped, clutching his neck, his face turning a deep, violent red. He staggered back, his equilibrium gone, and crashed headfirst into the corner of the wooden work table. He went down hard and did not get up. I stood over him, heaving for breath. I reached down and ripped the pistol from the waistband of his jeans. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to steady as I leveled the barrel between his eyes. "Turn over," I commanded, my voice guttural. "On your stomach. Now." He groaned, incoherent, eyes rolling back in his head. He was out cold. I did not waste time tying him up. I rifled through his pockets and found a ring of keys. I tried the small ones on the padlock at Lucas's ankle. None worked. They were car keys and house keys. Damn it. I whispered. I looked at where the chain was anchored. It was bolted to the floor with a heavy steel plate. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench. I could not break the lock, but I could move the anchor. I worked feverishly, sweat dripping into my eyes, until the bolts gave way. "Lucas, we have to go," I said, hauling him up. "The chain is coming with us." He screamed into his sleeve as I dragged him up the stairs, the heavy chain clanking behind him like a ghost's shackle. We made it to the kitchen, then out the back door into the biting cold. Gerald's armoured SUV was parked by the garage. I pressed the panic button on Trent's key fob, and the lights flashed. I shoved Lucas into the back seat, threw his heavy chain in after him, and climbed into the driver's seat. As I reversed down the long driveway, leaving Trent unconscious in the dark, I did not look back at the house. I just drove into the black mouth of the night. I drove Gerald's armoured SUV with the white-knuckled grip of a woman half my age, ignoring the sleek digital dashboard that blinked warnings I did not understand. The highway was a sheet of black ice, but I did not slow down. In the rearview mirror, I saw Lucas curled into a ball on the leather seat. The heavy steel chain was still locked to his ankle, clanking against the doorframe with every pothole we hit. "I am sorry, Mom," he mumbled, his voice thick with pain and shame. "You were right. About the Knox family. I should have listened. Save your breath." "Lucas," I said, my eyes scanning the road for flashing lights. "We are not out of this yet." I bypassed the exit for the main hospital in Silver Ridge. That place would be crawling with Gerald's cronies within the hour. Instead, I swerved off onto a dim exit ramp leading to the industrial district. I remembered seeing a sign for a 24-hour urgent care clinic there, tucked between a welding supply shop and a storage facility. It was the kind of place where factory workers went to stitch up cuts off the books. I pulled up to the clinic, the tires crunching over old snow. I practically carried Lucas inside. He was dead weight, his consciousness slipping. The waiting room was empty. Dr. Patel, a man with greying temples and exhausted eyes, looked up from a magazine. He stood up so fast his chair knocked against the wall when he saw us, a 61-year-old woman dragging a beaten man with a chain trailing from his leg. "What in God's name?" Dr. Patel stammered, backing away. "Did you do this?" "I am calling the police." I shoved Lucas onto the nearest examination bed and turned on the doctor. I did not plead. I did not cry. I used the voice that had commanded trauma scenes for 30 years. "Look at his tibia." "Doctor," I snapped, pointing at Lucas's twisted leg. "That is a transverse fracture caused by a blunt object, likely a bat or a pipe. Look at the defensive bruising on his forearms. Look at the ligature marks on his wrists. Does that look like I beat him? Or does it look like I just pulled him out of a torture chamber?" Dr. Patel hesitated, his medical instincts warring with his fear. He stepped forward and touched Lucas's leg. Lucas screamed. He needs stabilization and pain management. Now, I ordered. The doctor nodded slowly. He began to work, calling for a nurse. A young woman named Haley ran in, her eyes going wide at the chain. Get the police on the line. Haley, Dr. Patel murmured as he prepped a syringe. Report a suspicious trauma. Possible hostage situation. I froze. I watched Haley pick up the phone at the front desk. I listened closely. Yes. Sheriff Dugan, please, she said into the receiver. Dr. Patel said it is urgent. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sheriff Dugan. Lucas had told me about him. He was the man who cheated at golf with Gerald Knox every Sunday. Hang up the phone, I said. Ma'am, it is protocol, the doctor said, not looking up from the cast he was setting. Then I heard it. Sirens. Not the distant wail of a patrol car responding to a call, but the aggressive, screaming approach of multiple vehicles closing in, fast. They were too close. They had been waiting. They are not coming to help, I said. I ran to the front door of the clinic and threw the deadbolt. I grabbed a heavy metal filing cabinet and dragged it across the floor, the metal screeching in protest, and slammed it against the door. What are you doing? Dr. Patel shouted, dropping his roll of gauze. You are trapping us in here. I am keeping us alive. I yelled back. I turned to the nurse. Haley, give me your phone. She clutched it to her chest, shaking. No, you are crazy. Give it to me. I snatched the phone from her trembling hands. I saw the TikTok icon on her home screen. I had only seen the girl on the bus using it, but I knew what it did. It was a window to the world that Gerald Knox could not bribe. Open this app, I demanded, shoving the phone back at her. Start a live stream. Now. Do it. I screamed. Haley swiped the screen, her fingers fumbling. She held the phone up, the camera facing me. A little red counter at the top started at 0, then clicked to 3, then 10. I grabbed the phone from her and turned the camera on Lucas. I showed the cast. I showed the bruises. And then I zoomed in on the rusted steel chain still locked around his ankle. My name is Margaret Doyle, I said, staring directly into the lens. My voice shook, but I forced it to be loud. This is my son, Lucas. I just pulled him out of the basement of his own home at 124 Oak Street, Silver Ridge. He was chained to the floor by his father-in-law, Gerald Knox, and his brother-in-law, Trent Knox. The viewer count ticked up. 50, 100. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small USB drive I had grabbed from the table next to the drugs in the basement. They used his trucking company, North Star Freight, to smuggle narcotics. I continued, holding the drive up to the light. This drive contains video evidence of their warehouse operations. They tried to inject my son with heroin tonight to frame him. They wanted to kill him and call it an overdose. Bang! A massive fist pounded on the glass of the clinic door. Open up, Sheriff's Department, a voice boomed from outside. It was the same voice I had heard on the phone earlier, the voice that told Sabrina to hang up. I did not flinch. I turned the camera toward the shaking door, capturing the violence of the blows. Then I turned it back to my face. If after this live stream ends, I disappear, or if my son dies in this room, do not look for a stranger, I said, my voice rising over the noise. Understand that the people responsible are wearing badges and collecting salaries from your tax money. Sheriff Dugan is outside right now, trying to break in to destroy this evidence. I glanced at the screen. The viewer count was not just ticking up anymore, it was exploding. It jumped from 800 to 5,000 in the span of a breath, then to 12,000. The comments were scrolling so fast they were just a blur of colour, angry emojis, questions, people tagging the FBI, tagging news stations. The world was watching. My name is Margaret Doyle. I repeated one last time. And I am not going down without a fight. Suddenly, the banging stopped. A moment of silence hung in the air, heavier than the noise. Then, crash. The glass panel of the front door shattered inward, raining shards onto the linoleum floor. Doctor. Patel screamed and covered his head. Haley shrieked. Through the broken window, a small metal canister was tossed inside. It skittered across the floor, spinning and hissing like a furious snake. White smoke began to billow out, expanding rapidly. It was not smoke. It was tear gas. My eyes started to sting instantly, and my throat closed up. "Get down!" I yelled, dropping the phone but leaving it face up on the floor, the camera still streaming the expanding white fog as boots crunched over the broken glass. The tear gas hit me like a shovel to the face. My throat closed up instantly, and my eyes felt like they were being scrubbed with steel wool. I fell to my knees, coughing violently, but my hands found the metal railing of Lucas's gurney. I shoved him backward, deeper into the room, and ripped a privacy curtain off its hooks to throw over his head. "Upload it," I rasped, my voice barely a squeak. "Haley, press the button," across the room. Haley was huddled in the corner, clutching Dr. Patel. She was sobbing, tears streaming down her face from the gas, but I saw her thumb hit the screen. "It is done," she choked out. I posted it. The barricaded door finally gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Sheriff Dugan stormed in, leading 3 deputies. They were wearing full tactical gear and gas masks, looking like monsters emerging from the fog. They did not sweep the room. They did not check for shooters. They came straight for me. Dugan kicked the phone away from my hand and leveled his service weapon at my chest. "Margaret Doyle, you are under arrest." His voice boomed through the amplifier of his mask. "Charges are kidnapping, aggravated assault, and possession of intent to distribute narcotics." He did not even glance at Lucas, who was moaning in agony behind the curtain. He stepped over the chain on the floor as if it were a piece of trash. I wiped the mucus from my eyes and looked up, spotting the red blinking light of the clinic's security camera in the corner of the ceiling. "You got here fast," I wheezed, staring directly at the lens. 3 minutes? You were waiting outside. How else did you know to pull the alarm? Shut up, old woman. Dugan growled. He holstered his pistol and unclipped a taser. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back, or I will light you up." I braced myself for the voltage. But before he could pull the trigger, a deep, rhythmic thumping shook the building. It grew louder, rattling the medical jars on the shelves. A spotlight beam cut through the smoke outside the broken window, blindingly bright. "This is the D," a voice thundered from a loudspeaker, magnified 100 times over the roar of a helicopter. "All local law enforcement. Drop your weapons. Exit the building with your hands up." Dugan froze. He looked at the window, then back at me. Confusion, visible even behind his mask. Before he could make a decision, the remaining glass front of the clinic exploded inward. A team of 6 figures clad in black body armor swarmed into the room like a flood of dark water. They moved with a precision that made the sheriff's deputies look like amateurs. Federal agents, get down, get down. Leading the charge was a woman with no helmet, just a gas mask, which she ripped off as soon as the room was secured. She was about 40 years old, with sharp features and eyes that scanned the room like a laser. This was Andrea Keller. She took in the scene in a single second. The chained man on the bed, the elderly woman on her knees, the local cops holding weapons. "Sheriff Dugan!" Andrea barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Lower your weapon. This is now a federal crime scene under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. You are out of your jurisdiction," Keller Dugan shouted, though he lowered the taser slightly. "This is a local kidnapping case. I have the suspect in custody." Andrea's phone rang. It was a sharp, demanding tone. She answered it without taking her eyes off Dugan. "Keller," she said. She listened for 2 seconds, her expression hardening. "Yes, Director. We are on site. Yes, I saw the live stream. Understood." She hung up and stepped into Dugan's personal space. "That was Washington," she said, her voice deadly calm. "The director of the DEA just watched a 61-year-old grandmother do your job for you on social media. His orders are to protect the witnesses at all costs and arrest anyone standing in the way. That includes you." Dugan's shoulders slumped, one by one. The deputies dropped their guns. "Cuff them." Andrea ordered her team, as Dr. Patel and Haley watched in stunned silence. The local police were stripped of their belts and zip-tied. A federal medic rushed to my side, flushing my eyes with saline. Another team began cutting the chain off Lucas's leg with hydraulic shears. I lay back on the gurney they brought for me, the adrenaline finally crashing. Andrea Keller walked over, looking down at me with a mixture of respect and concern. "Mrs. Doyle," she said softly, "you started a fire tonight." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "I have been trying to nail the Knox family for 2 years," she whispered. "Every time we got close, the intel dried up. Your video gave us the probable cause we needed to storm the warehouse tonight." She paused, looking around the room, her brow furrowed. "But be careful," she added, a shadow passing over her face. "My regional supervisor, Mason Cole, he should have been here 10 minutes before me. He is the one who covers Silver Ridge. But his radio is silent. Something is not right." I looked at her, my vision still blurry from the gas. I realized then that the war was not over. We had just won the first battle, but the enemy was bigger than just a family of thugs in a fancy house. It was inside the machine itself. 4 months of winter melted into a grey, slushy spring. But the cold inside me never thawed. Lucas spent those months in a secret military medical facility, learning to walk again. His right leg was held together by titanium rods and screws. The scar ran from his knee to his ankle, a jagged, purple roadmap of the violence inflicted upon him. When he walked, it was with a heavy, rhythmic limp and the support of a metal cane. We were relocated to a town called Pine Hollow, living under false names provided by the Witness Protection Program. It was a quiet place, boring enough to be invisible. The Knox family, however, had not disappeared into a cell. Their high-priced lawyers had tied the justice system in knots, delaying arrest warrants with endless motions and suppressions. They were free, and their money was buying them time. Andrea Keller visited us every few weeks, her face growing more gaunt each time. She brought us groceries and bad news. We raided another warehouse in Denver last night. Andrea told us one rainy Tuesday, slamming her hat onto the kitchen table. Empty. Swept clean 2 hours before my team breached the door. It is like they have a crystal ball. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. It was not magic. It was math. You are leaking. Andrea, I said, not turning around. Someone is opening the faucet before you even turn on the water. Later that afternoon, while Andrea was in the bathroom, her encrypted phone buzzed on the table. She had left it on speaker from a previous call. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but 30 years of listening for breath sounds in noisy ambulances had made my ears sharp. A male voice drifted out, smooth and calm. Andrea, listen to me. Do not make a scene about the empty warehouse. Let them get comfortable. If you push too hard, they will go underground for good. Trust the process. I recognized the voice. It was Mason Cole, her regional supervisor. It was the same voice I had heard on the news clips Andrea showed us. The man giving press conferences about ongoing investigations. But his tone was wrong. It was too soothing. It was the tone of a paramedic telling a patient it is going to be okay when they know the patient is bleeding out. He was not managing the case. He was managing Andrea. My suspicions were confirmed a week later when Claire rolled into town. Claire was a long-haul trucker I had pulled out of a jackknifed rig 10 years ago on an icy Chicago highway. She had never forgotten that I kept her talking while the jaws of life cut her free. She found us through back channels I did not ask about. Margaret, Claire said, sipping coffee in my dimly lit kitchen. The wires are buzzing. There is a ghost load looking for a carrier. The big companies won't touch it. It is coming from the Knox network. They are desperate to move product to the border to recoup their losses, but they don't have the trucks anymore. A plan clicked into place in my mind, sharp and metallic, like the slide of a gun. Lucas, I said, looking at my son. We are going back into business. We created Skyline Cargo. It was a shell company, existing only on paper and a burner phone. We used 2 of Claire's unmarked rigs. We put the word out on the encrypted channels that Lucas knew Skyline Cargo moved anything, anywhere, for triple the price. No questions asked. When I pitched the idea to Andrea, she nearly flipped the table. Absolutely not, she hissed, pacing my small living room. It is suicide. You are civilians. If they find out it is you, they won't. I interrupted, my voice steady. Because they are arrogant. They think they broke us. They think Lucas is a cripple and I am just a scared old woman hiding in a hole. They only trust people they think they have beaten. I will show them a grandmother who knows how to fake a fall. Andrea stared at me for a long time, then slowly nodded. She saw the look in my eyes. It was not the look of a victim. It was the look of a hunter setting a snare. The bait was taken 3 days later. A broker approached Skyline Cargo with a job. The manifest listed the cargo as surplus medical equipment. The pickup location was an abandoned stone church outside of Denver. The drop-off was a shell company near the Mexican border. But it was the date that made the hair on my arms stand up. They wanted the pickup to happen on December 24th, Christmas Eve. They wanted to mock us. They wanted to celebrate the anniversary of their crime with another successful shipment. They thought they were writing the script, turning the holy night into another joke. They did not know that the director's chair had changed hands. Tell them yes, I told Lucas as he held the burner phone, his hand trembling slightly. Tell them Skyline Cargo will be there. I looked out at the peaceful streets of Pine Hollow. Last Christmas, I had packed a suitcase with fear in my heart. This Christmas, I was packing a hearse. The snow swirled through the broken roof of the old stone church, a hollowed-out carcass of a building on the frozen outskirts of Denver. The bell tower had snapped in half years ago, leaving a jagged silhouette against the moonless sky. Inside, it was pitch black, save for the guttering light of a few candles we had lit and the wavering beams of flashlights cutting through the dust. I stood in the center of the nave, clutching a heavy metal box. It was supposed to contain the payment for the transport job. In reality, it held rusted washers and cut-up newspaper. Lucas stood to my right. He leaned heavily on his cane, the titanium in his leg aching in the freeze, but his back was straight. Andrea stood to my left, her hand hovering near her concealed weapon under her jacket. She was wired for sound and video, broadcasting to a ghost team from the Department of Justice, hidden in unmarked white vans 2 miles away. They were waiting for the signal. The signal was simple, the church bell ringing, but the rope was cut, and to the naked eye, we were completely alone. Then, headlights swept across the stained glass windows, illuminating the saints in flashes of blue and red. Car doors slammed. The heavy oak doors of the church creaked open. Gerald and Marlene Knox stepped in like royalty visiting a slum. They wore floor-length fur coats that cost more than my house, their breath misting in the air. Trent walked point, a heavy pistol strapped to his hip, followed by 3 bodyguards who looked like they were carved out of granite. Trent shone his tactical light on us and laughed. "Well, look at this," he sneered, the beam blinding me for a second. "If it isn't the ghost of Christmas past and her cripple son." "You look terrible." "Margaret?" Marlene added, wrinkling her nose at the smell of damp stone. "You really should have stayed in Wyoming knitting socks." I did not answer. I was looking past them, into the deep shadows of the vestibule. A figure stepped out. He was not wearing a fur coat. He was dressed in tactical black, his weapon hanging casually at his side. "Hello?" "Andrea," the man said. His voice was smooth, familiar, and terrifyingly calm. Andrea froze. Her breath hitched in the cold air. "Mason?" she whispered, the word trembling. "What? What are you doing here?" "You are supposed to be at the command center." "From the beginning?" Mason Cole said, stepping into the circle of light. "We were just acting, weren't we?" Andrea looked like she had been slapped. The realization washed over her face, turning her pale skin even whiter. The empty warehouses, the leaked intel, the delays. It was never bad luck. It was him. "You are on their payroll." Andrea spat out. "I am on the winning payroll." Mason corrected with a shrug. "They pay better than the government, and the benefits include not getting shot tonight." He gestured around the ruined church with his free hand. "Here is the narrative for the morning news." Mason explained, sounding bored. A drug deal between the new Skyline Cargo Syndicate and the Knox organization went south. Shots were fired. The leaders of Skyline, a known felon, and his mother were killed. Sadly, Agent Keller was caught in the crossfire. I arrived too late to save her, but I managed to secure the scene. At his signal, the bodyguards moved. They disarmed Andrea before she could draw, kicking her legs out from under her. They zip-tied her hands and shoved her down next to Lucas. Mason walked up to me. He towered over me, smelling of mints and gun oil. He looked down at the metal box in my hands. "You should have stayed home." Margaret, he said, smiling a thin, cruel smile. This world does not make statues for old women who think they are heroes. It just digs holes for them. I looked him in the eye. I was not afraid. The fear had burned out of me months ago in a basement in Silver Ridge. Now, I felt cold and hard, like the steel rescue knife tucked in my boot. I slowly bent down and placed the metal box on the cracked stone floor. "I am thirsty," I said, my voice raspy and dry. Can I have a drink of water before you do it?" Mason laughed, a dry, barking sound. He nodded to Gerald. "Let the old bag beg." Gerald sneered. "Finish it, Trent." Gerald raised his hand. Trent stepped forward, raising his pistol. He aimed it directly at Lucas's chest. Lucas did not look away. He stared at his brother-in-law with a hatred that could melt snow. The silence in the church was deafening. The wind howled through the broken windows like a mourning choir. Click-clack. The sound of the slide racking back on Trent's gun echoed off the stone walls. It was the sound of a period being put at the end of a sentence. But they did not know I had already rewritten the paragraph. Trent pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash lit up the dark nave like a lightning strike, but the recoil was wrong. The sound was not the thunderous crack of a lethal round. It was a hollow pop. The bullet veered wild, chipping a chunk of stone off the pillar 3 feet to the left of Lucas's head. Trent stared at the gun in confusion, and in that split second, I remembered the magazine swap Andrea had managed during the pat-down at the entrance. He was firing blanks mixed with low-velocity duds before he could rack the slide. I slammed my hand down on the remote control concealed in my pocket. The main breakers of the church tripped, killing the overhead lights. The space plunged into darkness, instantly replaced by the pulsing, blood-red glow of the emergency backup strobes. At the same moment, the rusted bell in the broken tower above us, which I had rigged to a mechanical winch, began to toll. Clang, clang, clang. It was the dinner bell for the wolves. "Get down!" I screamed, throwing my body over Lucas to shield him. The heavy oak doors of the church did not just open. They were blown off their hinges. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, down now." Beams of blinding white tactical light cut through the red haze. This was not the DEA. This was the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section, backed by a heavily armed FBI SWAT team. They swarmed the nave from every entrance, moving with a violence that made the Knox bodyguards freeze. In the chaos, Andrea dropped her shoulder and rolled. She snatched a Glock from the ankle holster of the guard nearest to her before he even realized she was moving. "Hold your fire!" Mason Cole screamed, holding up his badge like a shield. "I am Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Mason Cole. I am under deep cover. These people are under arrest." "You are under arrest!" "Mason!" A voice boomed from the doorway. The team leader of the DOJ unit stepped forward, leveling an assault rifle at Mason's chest. "We have the warrant, signed by a federal judge an hour ago." Mason's face went slack. "On what evidence?" "You have nothing but the word of a senile old woman." "We have everything," I said, my voice cutting through the noise as I stood up. "The USB drive on the floor is empty. Mason, it is a decoy. The real drive, with the warehouse footage, the clinic live stream, and the recordings of your voice authorizing the shipments, my friend Claire drove that to New York City yesterday. It has been in the hands of the New York Times and the Inspector General since this afternoon." Mason looked at me, and for the first time, the arrogance evaporated. He looked like a cornered rat. One of the Knox bodyguards, realizing his paycheck was about to expire, made a desperate decision. He raised his submachine gun. Gun, someone yelled. The firefight was short and brutal. Andrea fired twice, dropping the bodyguard with a shot to the shoulder. Trent, recovering from his shock, raised his weapon toward the agents. I did not have a gun, but I saw one sliding across the floor near my feet. I did not think. I grabbed it. My hands trembled, but my memory of anatomy did not. I aimed low. I did not want to kill him. Death was too easy. Bang! The bullet tore through Trent's thigh, shattering the femur. He collapsed, screaming in a high-pitched wail that echoed off the stone walls. Gerald Knox tried to grab Marlene, pulling her in front of him as a human shield. But a tactical officer circled behind him and drove a rifle butt into his kidneys. They went down in a heap of fur and cursing. Mason Cole stood alone by the altar. He looked at the agents closing in, then at the gun in his hand. He realized there was no way out. He raised the barrel to his own temple. He wanted the coward's exit. No, I shouted. I grabbed the heavy metal lockbox from the floor, the one filled with scrap metal, and hurled it with every ounce of strength I had left. It spun through the air and smashed into Mason's wrist. The bone crunched, and the gun clattered to the floor. "You don't get to leave," I hissed, stepping toward him as the agents tackled him to the ground. "You are going to stand in a cage and tell the world what you did." 6 months later, the federal courtroom in Denver was silent enough to hear a pin drop. I stood on the witness stand, wearing a simple grey dress. I looked at the defense table where Gerald, Marlene, Trent, and Mason sat in orange jumpsuits. They looked small. They looked ordinary. I told the jury everything. I told them about the text message that called me an old lady. I described the smell of urine and mold in the basement. I described the sound of the chain dragging on the concrete. I described the needle trembling on the silver tray. Then the prosecution played the videos, the warehouse, the clinic, and finally, the body camera footage from Andrea's button cam in the church, showing Mason negotiating his cut of the profits moments before the raid. There was no defense. There was no misunderstanding. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts," the jury foreman read. "Kidnapping, racketeering, drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder." The judge sentenced them to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel came down, I felt a hand squeeze mine. I looked down. Lucas was sitting in the front row, his cane resting against his knee. He was crying silently. I did not cry. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the courtroom, and felt a weight lift off my chest that I had been carrying since Christmas Eve. We walked out of the courthouse together, into the blinding flash of news cameras. Reporters shouted questions, asking how a 61-year-old widow took down a crime syndicate. I did not answer. I just held my son's arm to steady him. They wanted a story about a hero. But as we walked down the steps toward the waiting car, I knew the truth. I was just a mother who refused to stay home when she was told. And in the end, that was the most dangerous thing in the world. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Stay safe out there, and remember to always trust your instincts.